My name's Chris Aarant. I'm with USI Consulting Group. I've been in the ESOP space for a little over 13 years. USI, we're administrative and consulting third-party administration group. So I had the opportunity to work on ESOPs of all different shapes and sizes, small companies fresh out of the ESOP transaction on up to large companies that have been ESOPs for decades. Employee-owned companies are fantastic. The culture that it brings to that organization when companies invest in educating folks, the power of an ESOP that brings, that culture of being an employee owner from the ground level on up to the C-suite, everybody having vested interest in the day-to-day, goings on of that organization, and being able to just share in the growth and the success of that company is tremendously powerful. You have folks that are pulling in the same direction because essentially they all get to share and benefit in that growth of their collective efforts. I think the biggest thing is just think about the folks that helped you grow that company. Certainly you've got options on the table to sell to third-party companies that may be attractive, but thinking about that legacy that's left behind. Employee ownership, that structure where that transition of ownership that you're leaving behind to your management, to the employees that are left there after you've phased out, being able to preserve the legacy, the culture that's there, basically to have that company continue as it always has, unchanged, through the power of an ESOP. Whereas if you sell to an outside party, you could have wholesale changes to your management, the way that you do business. With an ESOP transaction, employee ownership culture, your organization, that legacy that you've put blood, sweat, and tears into is essentially left behind for those folks that help you grow it, and it can continue into perpetuity. I think the biggest treat for me in the space that we operate in is seeing companies in the initial phase of that ESOP transaction where everything's new. The ownership is, the selling shareholder is taking a step back. Most folks in these companies have no prior exposure to what it's like working for an employee-owned company, and reasonably they've got some suspicion. And to see, us being able to chip away at that through education, and then to see those employees get bought in to that employee ownership culture, and over time through education, and then certainly through, via an ESOP, the account values as they grow, and that company appreciates in value over time to where these folks have material, financial benefit in that plan. To see folks come from that initial stage where everything's new to the stage of being bought into the ESOP, and then till, decades later where you have meaningful balances in these ESOP plans that, quite frankly, that save a lot of folks in their retirement years. To see that transition from those early stages into folks being prepared for retirement is truly a treat to watch, and certainly one that is fun to watch from our side. If you're considering a transition in ownership, to weigh your options, certainly ESOPs and employee ownership is not the only path. I think it is very strongly that it is one that is worth considering. It's certainly not a one-size-fits-all. It's not something that's going to make sense for everybody, but it's one that if I were a business owner, I would want to have at the table as I'm considering my options, because certainly when you think about the advantages that employee ownership brings to your employee base, it is tremendously beneficial.